CCTV is a 2-hour drive north from the COP conference venue in Marrakesh. But for these visitors, it's well worth the trip to see a project that could revolutionize farming in Morocco. Cereal is a staple food in Morocco, but production is under threat. It's a rain-fed crop, and the rain's getting less every year. Morocco needs to make the most of every drop, and what's happening here is one practical solution.
Rain-fed agriculture is the main problem, and it's gonna be for the whole region. We are, as I said, we have lost a big amount of water that we used to receive from rain.
The cereal farmers are using a technique known as direct seeding. It means they don't have to plow when they plant. So when it does rain, more of the water is retained near the roots. This is a technique widely used in China. In just 20 years, China expanded direct seeding to cover 7 million hectares. Officials and farmers from Morocco were hosted in China to learn how they did it.
In China, the focus is very much on food security, so this was a key aspect that we discovered on that trip.
The results at CCTV are encouraging. In so-called wet years, yields are 50% higher than with traditional planting and 100% more in dry years, and production costs are 25% less.
600 hectares.
Morocco's government partnered with the UN's climate financing facility, the GEF, to fund the CCTV project, and at 3 other sites, all of them successful. The plan now is to roll out direct seeding nationwide. Maria Galang, CCTV, Marrakesh, Morocco.
Well, let's check in with the COP22 in Marrakesh. Penina Kariba now joins us with an update on what's going on. Penina, welcome to the show. Now, of course, the second week of negotiations is kicking off. A number of world leaders are arriving in Morocco, of course, for the high-level segment of discussions. Any update on who is on ground so far? And certainly, what issues do you expect to see tabled by African leaders?
Well, which, like you mentioned, tomorrow we're seeing global leaders, basically the political class, gathering here to join other stakeholders to discuss the implementation of the Paris Agreement. So we're expecting some pretty intense discussions in the coming days. But for African countries, the agenda is very clear. It's financing, it's capacity building. Now, of course, African leaders have said they want concrete actions, and they feel so far this COP has not lived up to its expectations. Now, when it comes to financing, African countries want clarity and urgency on the annual $100 billion green climate green climate fund, and they want to know where are these funds going to come from. Now, we've heard from some of them, and they're saying what they want basically is firm commitment to meet these, to provide these resources. Rather, they said in their own words that they want developed countries to put their money where their mouths are. So, very clear agenda. When they talk about capacity building, Uche, African leaders here are expected, of course, to talk about timelines provided. When are these resources going to be available? For instance, talking about technologies on low carbon, when are these going to be made available? When are they going to have trainings on African countries for the most affected people? So these are some of the things that they expected to table in the coming days, Uche.
And Peter, like you mentioned, a lot of people expect this COP meeting in Marrakesh to be an action and implementation COP. Now, some say that progress has been slow, but they, of course, are expected to come up with a rule book for the implementation of the Paris Agreement. Now, what are the expectations this week?
Well, expectations are high. To just put it in the words of the COP22 president, when he officially kicked off this summit last week, he said, now that the Paris Agreement has come into force, global leaders need to be reminded of the high expectations placed upon them to implement these goals. And basically, that's what everybody is watching out for as this busy week begins tomorrow with the gathering of these world leaders. Now, we're, of course, expecting policies to be formulated. And what everybody wants to know is the level of political commitment to committing to moving these goals into action. So people very keenly waiting to see the outcomes of that. Of course, we're not going to get the first hint of the directions these discussions will be taking up until tomorrow about 3 p.m. That's when we get the official statement from the world leaders. But then, of course, Uche, there's also the level of guidelines that are supposed to be established on the timeline spelled out in the Paris Agreement. And of course, again, some very, very keen delegates here waiting to know when are these guidelines going to be established, when are they going to be make known to everybody, and also people wanting here to know how do we make everybody commit to these guidelines. So there's lots of expectations here, Uche, but of course not until tomorrow, like I mentioned, do we get a clear indication of how things are going. But the UN again reiterating today that this is not a debate, it is now time for action, and that is what everybody now is waiting to see, how much action we get from the political class.
Quite interesting. Many thanks, Penina, for that. Of course, Penina Karibi joining us in Marrakesh.